Hello, this is America, where the media is incredibly divided. Not just traditional television, but a whole new wave of modern-day broadcasters. See, millions of Americans now get their news through alternative sources, podcasts, those kinds of things. But there is so much information, and also, quite frankly, a lot of disinformation too. So who is controlling it? What can we trust? What can we not trust? A lot to dig into. First, though, Anna Burns-Francis.
Thanks, Phil. America is at war. Not just a war of words, but also of missiles. So what is the American public to believe? In just a moment, we'll cross live to our chief US correspondent, Alan Fisher, at the White House. He'll have the latest on the administration's messaging of the conflict in Iran. It was Donald Trump's right-hand warman, Pete Hegseth, who was out fighting the media today. In a press conference with the president at his side, the Secretary of Defence was quick to pull the press corps into line.
The folks here in the room, these cameras, they have a choice. You're either informing the American people of the truth or you're not. Because I hear it from my people every day. Behind every headline you write, there's a helicopter crew in the air. And behind every news banner you write, there's a battalion on the move. And behind every fake news story, there's an F-35 pilot executing a dangerous mission. My message to the media is get it right.
But what is right? And what in the modern day media is real? We know how the president feels.
You're with who?
ABC News, sir.
Fake news. ABC fake news. One of the worst in the business.
Airports, Newsmax, sir. You've deployed ICE.
You're not doing a very good job.
You've deployed ICE agents.
You're not doing a good job. Did you hear me? Okay, go ahead.
What exactly do you want from these
I'm
talks?
taking CNN over Newsmax. You believe it?
All we have really over here is the fake news.
Fake news. A few days ago, I called the fake news the enemy of the people, and they are. They are the enemy of the people.
Friend or foe, the places Americans go to for trusted news has shifted drastically in recent years. So I'll start off by saying thank you for being here. Traditionally, people across the country would tune in to the likes of NBC, CNN, ABC, CBS and Fox News. They'd be reading newspapers like the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal and USA Today. But now there's a growing trend of alternative news sources. How do the new players, stack up against the traditional media juggernauts? Well, last year, for the first time ever, social media overtook television as the top news source for Americans. That's according to a major study which found 54% of people used social media as their source for news. Television was at 50%, while news podcasts outranked radio. A Gallup survey released late last year found Americans' trust in mass media has gone from around 70% in the late 1970s to just 28% last year. Now, the output may be different, but in the war with Iran, the source is quite often the same. It's the president. Let's go now to our chief US correspondent, Alan Fisher, who joins us from the White House. Alan, the president has a keen interest in how his comments are perceived in the media and a particular interest when it comes to messaging about how he is handling a situation.
Well, Donald Trump has always been his own best spokesman in his own mind. He thinks he can do a better job than anyone. We saw him on Twitter during his first campaign. When he was banned from that, he set up Truth Social, which has become huge. Throughout his years in the Oval Office, he has dismissed and denigrated the media, saying that they were fake news, the enemy of the people, that they weren't doing the job that they were brought in to do. And he believes that he gets much better coverage from those who are friendly to him. And we've seen that reflected here at the White House with the people who have a hard pass, who are allowed in to the building. A lot of them are now right-wing media influencers rather than legitimate news organisations. Their job is to amplify Donald Trump's message. Their message is to carry out to Donald Trump's followers exactly what Donald Trump wants them to hear. There's very rarely critical questioning. They look for sources where they can get them. But people who are on the streets, at home, watching the media, they still have a thirst for real news. We see that in every single poll that is carried, and they tend to focus on organisations that they like and often amplify their message. Let me just give you one example today. On the metro here in Washington, D.C., as I was travelling in, someone was staring at me. As I got up to leave the train thinking, that was a bit weird, he actually said, "You guys at Al Jazeera, I watch you all the time now. I think the job you're doing and the new programme you have from Washington is great." Americans want absolutely impartial news. Looks like they'll turn anywhere to get it.
Not just anywhere, Alan. To Al Jazeera. Thank you so much, Alan Fisher, joining us from the White House. It's no secret the American news media is under pressure from the White House to put a positive spin on the war with Iran. Heidi Jo Castro takes a look at how they're handling it.
Yeah, please.
Labeled the enemy of the people by President Donald Trump in his years-long effort to vilify and defund the press, journalists are now being told they should become cheerleaders of the war against Iran.
We've won this. This war has been won. The only one that likes to keep it going is the fake news.
Trump says the American press is downplaying the war's successes, and he's accused the media, without evidence, of generating these fake AI images of a burning U.S. aircraft carrier, saying the outlets should be charged with treason. The images were widely spread on social media where many people get their news, while mainstream outlets actually debunked the AI videos. But that hasn't stopped Trump's Secretary of Defense, a former Fox News host, from his continued attacks on the press. He slammed coverage emphasizing the war's death toll and economic impact, calling it unpatriotic.
A dishonest and anti-Trump press will stop at nothing. We know this at this point. To downplay progress, amplify every cost, and call into question every step.
Going beyond just words, the Pentagon this week kicked journalists out of its main building where they had held offices for years, citing the need for greater security. The New York Times and other outlets called the move unconstitutional. Further adding to the pressure, the chair of the Federal Communications Commission, a Trump ally, says TV and radio stations could lose their broadcast licenses for disseminating so-called fake news. He did not name any outlets or stories. What's the resistance? The U.S. press has issued fiery statements defending its independence and protections under the First Amendment. But with more Trump-friendly billionaires buying up media companies and continued pressure for positive war headlines, some fear the eventual erosion of this guardrail of democracy.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Heidi Jo Castro, Al Jazeera, Washington.
With such a fraught relationship between the Trump administration and the mainstream media, many Americans are finding their news elsewhere. Let's head back to Phil in the newsroom.
So what do these two words, the media, mean here in the United States in 2026? Well, you've got your big legacy networks, although they are losing viewers fast. On top of that, you've got your big cable networks. They do tend to have loyal audiences, but increasingly many Americans, younger Americans, are getting their news online. Part changing habits, part polarization, but for them, the TV transmitter is off. The internet is on. So let's take a look at some of these sources, and we'll probably start with the biggest. This is the Joe Rogan Experience, often said to be the most popular podcast in the world. 6 consecutive years at the top of the Spotify chart, often pulls in 14 million viewers or listeners per episode. Generally supportive of President Trump, but not always, and not on Iran.
I mean, this is why a lot of people feel betrayed, right? He ran on no more wars and these stupid, senseless wars, and then we have one that we can't even really clearly define why we did it.
Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly are another 2 big names. They're both former Fox News hosts who now know that the mic equals big money. Between them, they've got the best part of 10 million YouTube followers. Again, they generally support Donald Trump, not always, but they do know their audience.
There really is a bloodlust by some here domestically who do have the ear of the president to take out this regime as though it's going to be as easy as the Maduro raid.
Candace Owens is another big name on the right. You've also got Dan Bongino, regularly pulls in around 1 million listeners per show. He did have a show, then he quit to become Donald Trump's FBI deputy director. Then he quit that to go back to the mic.
Nobody likes war. Sometimes, unfortunately, in a complicated world full of real evil, demons, and I'm telling you, folks, evil is real. And in a world full of evil, sometimes good men have to step up.
Plus, let's not forget Steve Bannon, former Donald Trump advisor, helped him win in 2016, now has the Bannon's War Room podcast, although that was once called a top peddler of misleading information among political podcasts.
The center of gravity of this war shifted from Tehran as the center of this war. And of course, our military is doing a magnificent job of defanging, declawing this operation. It continues every night.
Pod Save America is a big left-leaning podcast. It is staffed by former Obama officials. Look at those numbers, 1.5 million listeners per episode. It targets a younger, more activist crowd, but they are definitely listening.
Like Iraq, this is a war of choice built off of a lie. Like, we'll get into the details in a minute, but there's no imminent nuclear threat. There is no imminent threat of Iran having a ballistic missile that could hit the United States.
The Majority Report has a massive reach too, as does the Young Turks podcast, which calls itself the world's most unapologetic, politically progressive podcast, with around 6.5 million YouTube followers.
I wrote over the weekend the same thing I just told you guys, which is, why doesn't Israel send the 5,000 ground troops? Why do Americans have to die instead? And he quote tweeted, deport.
You've got The Bulwark, which describes itself as defending America's liberal democracy. On top of that, you've got The Midas Touch, which describes itself as independent. But take a look at some of the thumbnails of its recent YouTube shows. And then there is one name that needs no introduction to either the left or the right.
This is Gavin Newsom.
California's outgoing Governor Gavin Newsom, who is not yet confirmed, but is widely expected to be one of those vying for the 2028 Democratic presidential nomination.
And is it safer now than ever because of Donald Trump?
I don't know. No, it's
restaurants are opening every quote unquote every day now.
So for the new media, the rules have changed. There is no filter. There is no editor. They now have a direct channel to the viewer, just how they like it.
So, with all that in mind, how much do Americans know about the war in Iran? And where are they getting their information from? We sent our correspondent to find out.
I'm Richard Gaisford here in Friendly, a small town in Maryland, to discover what people know about this war and where they're getting their information from.
Television. Yeah, television is the best source that we can get some news.
And do you trust what you're seeing and what you're hearing?
Well, not everything is trustworthy.
A lot of my news comes from social media, unfortunately, and my algorithm leans quite a bit left. So what I know about the war is mostly from left-leaning sources. I try to mitigate that.
So you're having to work quite hard to get a balance of views and news.
Oh, 100%.
I know that gas prices has increased.
And where are you getting the information from that helps you
same
understand?
as what Reginald said, social media. As you scroll, you might not want to see it, but it appears. And then from the news.
And when you watch the news and you see these social media feeds, do you trust what you're reading and seeing?
With a grain of salt.
All I know is that we strike Iran's biggest leader. And to me, I think that was kind of like crazy. Growing up, you realize more that the internet sometimes not telling the truth. So sometimes I believe it, or if I don't believe it, I look up more research.
So as the war goes on, you're watching more news?
Yes, sir. I've been watching the news ever since that started.
Are you hearing much at all?
No, actually, no. We're not hearing much.
I don't want to say I don't care, but I just don't listen to the news at all. The only thing I listen to the news for is the weather.
All right, joining me to discuss this and more is Akbar Shahid Ahmed, senior diplomatic correspondent for the Huffington Post, and Carrie Sheffield, a conservative commentator and director at Independent Women's Voice. Thank you both for coming in. Akbar, I'll start with you. Has this war been a campaign of misinformation?
There's been a pretty aggressive approach by the White House and the Pentagon during this war. As someone who's covered going back to the Obama administration, including the first Trump presidency, right? We've seen aggressive tactics, including from Democrats. Important to remember this kind of degradation of press culture is sadly a reflection, I think, a bit of the state of democracy in the US, not just partisan. In the war, you've seen concerns around how reporters are being treated. Access to the Pentagon, of course, is already reduced by this administration. That said, it's hard to talk about misinformation, but certainly there are people who have motivations for portrayals. So for instance, I think about Joe Kent, the National Counterterrorism Center chief, who resigned over the war. He had some really interesting points in his explanation directly related to the war. He then went off to make these kind of wild claims around Israel took the US into the Iraq war, which of course the Bush administration chose to go into. So there's a lot of players on all sides, pro-war and anti-war, that are putting out some kind of false narrative.
Okay, Carrie, where would you say then the bias lies in the narrative here?
Well, what's really interesting, your segment 2 segments ago was fascinating about all the new media and the podcasts. It really is in some ways an inkblot test of where people get their news, of what they want to consume. And I think what's different now compared to when you were first starting with the Obama administration is there are way more options for conservatives to get content that resonates with us that didn't exist. And there was this bigger reliance on the so-called now conservatives call it the legacy media, but it used to be called the mainstream media. It's now seen as dying and old and kind of a dinosaur. Your old school networks like ABC, CBS, NBC, those are seen as almost prehistoric. And now you're turning to social media, the X platform, which is owned by Elon Musk. And then I saw you had Steve Bannon on. I actually used to host a show on that same network where you had the logo there, Real America's Voice. I hosted a nationally syndicated show that fed into Bannon. I would toss to him sometimes. So I'm very familiar with Real America's Voice and how it is very penetrating the conservative thinking. And so I think what's really been interesting is that conservatives feel like we have a voice now that we didn't have before.
Can I put this to you? Because that's a really interesting point here. And there are some figures that have just come out from Adweek, actually, news ratings for February 2026. And you look at the top 10 shows amongst total viewers and amongst 25 to 54, that all coveted special age bracket. Out of the top, number 1, Fox News, 2, Fox News, 3, Fox News, 4, 5, 6, all the way down to number 7 is finally held by MS Now. 7, 8, 9, 10, slot number 11 and slot number 12 are all held by Fox News. So there is plenty of commentary amongst legacy and new media, is there not, if you are a conservative voter or a conservative-leaning type?
Well, it's interesting that it's all Fox. That, to me, actually suggests that that is actually one legacy outlet.
Yeah.
Where are all the old, there are multiple. If conservatives perceive ABC, NBC, CBS, MS Now, CNN as the opposition, so therefore Fox is the only alternative to be, as Laura Logan once called, the Wailing Wall for women, whereas the men on the Wailing Wall get a much bigger section
they don't
of
rank,
the
though.
Western Wall.
These, in numbers, in terms, Fox outranks all
But
of
what
them.
I'm saying is if you were to add up all these other networks that I just mentioned and then compare them to Fox, that's why, because Fox basically has everyone. If you're conservative, Fox is pretty much the only quote-unquote legacy outlet you can go to. That's why they dominate, because they don't have ABC, they don't have CBS, they don't have NBC, they don't have CNN. That's why.
Akbar, can we look at Donald? Yeah, do you want to jump on that?
I think that's a really interesting point that sort of conservatives have felt alienated by a lot of these cases. I think it's important to see how that might be changing with CBS and CNN now, with the Ellisons coming in and the Trump administration.
You're talking about the ownership here.
The ownership, and of course there's been a sort of push by CBS's new editor-in-chief, Bari Weiss, extremely pro-Israel voice, sort of has been a pro-war voice and firmly against Iran for a long time. So I'm curious to see how that'll shift,
I think it would be great to have more balance.
Yeah.
That's been the issue. And even this phrase, fake news, I wrote several articles about this. Monmouth University in 2017, they asked Americans, what do you think about fake news? And what was astonishing was that more than 3/4, I think 77%, said that so that's 2/3 of Americans, I'm sorry, 3/4 of Americans said that the media creates fake news. And what was very key, and I think this has been missing, they defined fake news as biased news, coverage that is not fair to the other side. And so that's why
it was about editorial
fake
direction,
news.
wasn't it?
Exactly.
I had a look at that because it was also really interesting. The other thing I found interesting out of that research that you cited was that people still trusted CNN more than they trusted the president. They still trusted Fox News more than they trusted the president. They still trusted MSNBC more than they trusted the president. Akbar, when we look at the commentary around President Trump and his relationship with the media, it's got a lot of layers to it, obviously. There is one tool that he uses a lot, and that is Truth Social. That is his own method of social media. How has that changed the perception of what is news?
Yeah, I think a lot of people now just follow a Truth Social feed to see what the president is saying and thinking truly at any hour of the day. I think what's important to remember is people have felt this loss of trust over time. When you're looking at the alternative options, what are you seeing there? Truth Social, as you mentioned, is owned by the president. There's also roots to enrichment, right? Personal enrichment that's happening here, and roots to a lack of editorial control. So you were talking about podcasts, alternative news sources. What makes me very worried is we're losing that professional layer of editing, fact-checking, reporting, and that's quite alarming.
Yeah. Conservative media podcaster and former Fox News host Megyn Kelly came out this week furiously against what she called cheerleading of wars and government talking points.
Our troops' efforts on the ground. We accepted all the administration's that was being shoved down our throats about Iraq and Afghanistan. It's now since come out that they just lied about Afghanistan and the alleged successes there for years. And I refuse to be a part of that again.
Now, when we look at what President Trump's messaging is from his own platforms or how he messages himself and the war message to the media, Carrie, what does a conservative or a Republican or a Trump voter make of a conservative commentator like Megyn Kelly making those sorts of comments?
Well, Megyn Kelly and Donald Trump have a long history, as
They
we
do.
know.
Yeah,
so
they do.
this relationship has never been linear. So let's put that context. And I've been on I was on Megyn Kelly's show with her on Fox. I've been on her podcast now. So I have had a long-term professional relationship with her. I respect her. She's an independent thinker, independent voice. So I respect that. And that's, I think, the difference for a conservative in general is that when you look at college campuses, for example, it is the conservatives consistently who argue for freedom of speech, where it is the left that always wants to shut it down. In terms of the point you made on Truth Social, I would point out, do we remember why Trump created Truth Social? It's because he was thrown off of Twitter by Jack Dorsey. He was also thrown off of Facebook by Mark Zuckerberg. So that's what's very interesting is that conservatives have created an alternative ecosystem. By the way, it's also in banking and a whole other, they call it like an alternative economy for conservatives who have been iced out, who have been Wall Street as well, have marginalized conservatives. And so when conservatives create our own ecosystem and economy in response, then we're perceived as sinister, even though we were the ones who were shoved off to begin with.
Hang on, have conservatives been iced out, though? The biggest podcast in the world is Joe Rogan. The president is a Republican. Conservatives have not been iced out of this country.
He was thrown off in 2020.
He was voted back in again.
Well, that's what I'm saying is that he did not become president because of CNN. He became president in spite of CNN and in spite of Twitter, of Jack Dorsey's Twitter.
Akbar, I want to come to you here.
Can I just bring up
please.
To your point about, I do think conservatives have felt quite silenced, and that's a very valid thing. What's worrying to me now, and you do see some conservatives push back on this, now that conservatives are in government, they are using that power often to a degree of silencing, right? I mean, if you think about, there was a Washington Post reporter whose home and laptops were searched and seized, right? There's been threats from the president to sue the New York Times, to sue BBC, and there's the long arm of the federal government, right? So I think freedom of speech is so important, and it's a consistent principle, right? That I think,
can I jump in and quickly ask you here, because Carrie referred to it a little. The grab from Megyn Kelly was very clearly a split away from what the messaging is from a Republican administration or a right-leaning administration at the moment. Do you see that splitting the right or the conservative movement in terms of how people feel about this war?
But certainly Trump sort of both encouraged and tapped a strain of kind of new right thinking, I would call, sort of pro-restraint in foreign policy, opposed to wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, opposed to, of course, NATO, European alliances. So yes, those voices are still there. I do think the kind of traditionalist Republicans, ironically, that he really railed against have been given a lifeline by this war, right? Okay. So if you think about sort of Bush-Cheney people, someone yesterday who was at a meeting of a lot of those former Republicans, they're feeling great right now.
Yeah, okay. Not surprisingly, the messaging from the administration to the media has seen the White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt frequently clashing with journalists.
Oh, okay. So you're a biased reporter with a left-wing opinion.
What do you want me to do?
Yeah, because you're a left-wing hack. You're not a reporter. You're posing in this room as a journalist, and it's so clear by the premise of your question. And you and the people in the media who have such biases but fake like you're a journalist, you shouldn't even be sitting in that seat.
All right, Carrie, there is that term that we've heard so often, fake news, and I wonder if that starts to lose a bit of power for the audience in terms of paying attention, that they feel like they're not getting information, they're just listening to an argument.
It's very interesting. When I saw that, I thought of my first time when I was in a White House press briefing. It was with President Trump in 2020. I was there with an outlet called justthenews.com, which is conservative leaning. And I was so struck because there was someone who had a seat on the front row from NBC News. That person was asking Trump about QAnon. I was asking Trump, this was in 2020, about Hong Kong, Jimmy Lai. I had just done a remote interview with Jimmy Lai. My colleague who was with One American News was asking about Iranian Middle East policy. And I thought, how richly ironic is this, that the supposed mainstream journalist is asking about a conspiracy theory in order to make President Trump look like a wacko.
It goes
and
both
I'm asking
ways, though,
about
Carrie.
substance.
This was
and
about,
so that's what Caroline is pushing back against.
This specific grab was actually about ICE and border agents and the number of people who've died in detention. So it wasn't a pithy conspiracy theory being regurgitated. And yet, if people had heard the whole exchange, at the end of the day, they're still listening to someone not giving them information. It is just twist an argument back? Does that water down the public's attention span for this type of discourse?
Well, I'd have to know the context. I didn't hear that specific question,
Sure.
but I would say in general, the posture that I've seen from the so-called legacy mainstream media about ICE is instinctively that they hate Trump. They hate anything that Trump is trying to do to protect American citizens, American jobs. By the way, the Obama administration, their civil rights division came out with a report showing how American black men with low education, high school dropouts, they suffered the most from illegal immigration, and yet the Obama administration did nothing about that.
Okay.
And so the bias
We
is
need
there.
to
They
move
don't
on.
support
I understand. Akbar, last question to you, just quickly. Do you see the messaging around this war changing or fractioning out the media and the way people respond to it from this point forward?
I do think people in the press have picked up on the fact that there was no justification. There still hasn't been evidence for why these attacks were launched. So I think the press has kind of rallied together to probe, but people are just a lot weaker. CNN is facing layoffs, and that's a media-wide problem, which risks what everyone gets, whether it's fact-checked, whether it's professional.
Thank you both. Carrie Sheffield joining us and Akbar Shahid Ahmed. All right, that question of the narrative and the war with Iran is even more pronounced on social media, both sides accusing the other of treating a deadly conflict like a video game. Alex Baird has been navigating the online echo chamber and has this roundup.
The narrative on social media is messy and it's chaotic. Trump, though, is clear. Media companies should face treason charges for fake news on the Iran war. The president accusing them of lies and paying gigantic salaries to late-night morons. The White House instead using its socials to push its own message that the US is winning its war a hole in one. Brendan Carr, the head of the Federal Communications Commission, threatening broadcasters, fall in line or lose your license. And the response to that, pretty damning. Some calling Carr an absolute joke, saying he should get locked up, and that this is almost as bad as North Korea. The truth online is, what is the truth? Conservative commentator Ben Shapiro is saying Democrats and podcasters are spreading Iran propaganda syndrome. Others saying podcasters like Shapiro are at war with each other over that Iran narrative.
We deserve this, honestly, Maddie. We deserve this.
And then the complete opposite, that MAGA isn't split at all, and it's all just noisy influences. But the distrust in mainstream media, it's hard to avoid.
The media support the enemy. They always do.
Media accused of supporting Iran, and in the same breath of laundering US-Israeli propaganda. Listen, I know it's a lot, but luckily on social media, the only noise you're getting is the noise you want to hear. Thanks to that algorithm, it's an echo chamber, whether you're left or you're right, narratives competing for space. Influencer priest Reverend Caleb Lyons reminding Americans seek truth even when it's complicated.
That's all from the team here in Washington. On This Is America, we'll keep following the decisions that shape the US and influence the world. For now, let's head back to Al Jazeera's global headquarters in Doha. Thanks for joining us.